All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Noji. I am representing the Utah Valley Amateur Radio Club, and we are here tonight with a couple of really special folks that are going to help us out this evening with a presentation. And we've been looking forward to this presentation for quite a while. However, recently the ARRL took some interest in our presentation tonight and wanted to take this chance, since they were unable to do the same thing in Dayton. They wanted to use our club meeting to present this topic, and we're more than happy to let them. And in fact, what we have tonight is a really great friend. I can't say we're close friends, but this is Brett Sutherland, N70KG, and he is right here from Utah and a good man. And so let me just make a couple of quick announcements on behalf of the club, and then we'll move on. I'll turn the time over to Brett afterwards. First of all, just wanted to say everybody, thanks for joining us tonight. And second of all, please, first of all, I'm glad you're able to join us technically, because otherwise we still can't do anything in person here in Orem or Linden or in Springville. So we got a few options. But we are moving forward with Field Day. So anybody who's interested in joining us for Field Day, we are going forward with it over at Strawberry Reservoir at the co-op area. And our campground is reserved, and we're starting to get ready for everything, and all of our equipment's up and ready and going, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun. Anyway, I don't know what the July meeting is going to look like, if we even have one. So we'll just kind of play it by ear. So in this meantime, is there anything else we want to say? All right, I don't have anything else. So this time, I'm just going to go ahead and turn the time over to Brett. So Brett, thank you. Take it over, please.
Thank you to Noji and to the Utah Valley Amateur Radio Club, and for this wonderful opportunity. I realize that the meat of this meeting is with Riley Hollingsworth, so I'm going to be brief. I was the official observer coordinator for the Utah section for most of the last 20 years. I can tell you that each of you has contributed to a great ham culture in our section, where we have very few problems. The ham community is, for the most part, self-regulating with the support from ARRL and the FCC. The OO program, or the Official Observer Program, was the method for taking care of persistent and egregious issues, as well as several other things, technical problems, and even good operator reports in the past. Local issues were and are taken care of at the club or trustee level when possible, as they pertain to repeaters. Historically, the Utah section has seen some malicious interference, but nothing like other areas of the country. More often, we've had unintentional interference from mics getting stuck between the seats of a car, or someone setting up setting a book on a desk mic, repeaters that go rogue in the winter with limited access, telemetry devices with harmonics landing in ham or other licensed services, or powered paragliders using ham bands for instruction and competitions, just to name a few. The Official Observer Program was the best we had, but wasn't without its shortcomings, especially as technology developed. The virtual monitoring program has replaced it and is new to all of us. In addition to many of you, I have questions about how it will work, how hams can report possible issues, where one goes for more information, and what are the material differences between the virtual monitoring program and the old Official Observer Program. I'd like to introduce you to Riley Hollingsworth, Kilo 4 Zulu Delta Hotel. Riley has overseen the development and implementation of the Volatile Monitoring Program and is uniquely qualified to speak tonight. I recall many prior FCC actions on the radio news line with Riley's name as special counsel to the FCC. Thankfully, none of them were directed at me. Riley holds a master's degree from the University of South Carolina and a law degree from Wake Forest. He's a member of QCWA and FISTS and has been an amateur since 1960. He's a great friend to ham radio. He lives in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania with his wife, Pat, who actually thinks the radio tower in the backyard is really cool and in fact helped him to build it. They've been experiencing thunderstorms and outages this evening, and we are grateful to him for sharing his valuable time. With no further ado, Mr. Hollingsworth, the time is yours.
Thank you, Brett. I appreciate it. Appreciate talking to you all, and especially to Utah, because Utah is sane compared to some of the other areas that we deal with. I do remember the hang glider radio situation from years ago, and the sailplanes, I think, as well. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a revamp of the Official Observer Program. And the OO program ran for over 50 years. It was a very good program, had the respect to the FCC, and did a lot to help amateur radio and to help the FCC. In fact, the first 20 or 30 cases that we started when we renewed the amateur radio enforcement effort came from the OO program. At the suggestion of the FCC in about 2017, after 10 years of budget cuts and staff losses and some field office closings, the FCC suggested that the league might want to consider revamping the OO program, rebranding it, and boost the training and supervision. They would participate in the supervision, and we would keep the number a little smaller, down to around 200 or slightly below that. There were 700 official observers, but there are really only about 200 that were active. And they promised that if we would focus on training and technology, that they would, in exchange, when we referred something to them, give that expedited action in the commission and with the field offices. And also they would ask us to pattern certain problems and look for certain problems out there from which they got complaints on the regular FCC complaint online system. So it was discussed and rediscussed, and the league looked at it, the board of directors looked at it, and it was edited and re-edited and so forth. And the board approved it in 2018, and in 2019, it was actually signed. And I can't tell you how many edits it went through, but everybody looked at it, it seems like, at the commission, and it seems like we have a very good document. So in May, we advertised for applications, and the requirement was that an applicant be licensed for 3 years, have basic amateur equipment, nothing elaborate, have basic computer skills in the sense of having the ability to send files and recordings over the internet to the league or to the volunteer monitor coordinator, and not have any enforcement history with the FCC. So we were really surprised at the number of applications that we got. We got upwards of 250. So we just started calling and interviewing one by one chronologically all through the applications, talked to everybody. Every volunteer monitor has gone through a telephone interview. When we got to about 200, we stopped, and we told the other applicants, or invited them to be in the reserve pool. We explained to them that we weren't turning them down. It's just that we had our quota, and if they were interested in being in the reserve pool, we would like to have them, because invariably some volunteer monitors will rotate out. We've lost a few in the last couple of weeks due to health problems, deaths in the family, and so forth. And so we will replace them from the reserve pool. So all of the applicants agreed that if they didn't get in, they would be in the reserve pool. So that's worked out. That's worked out very well. We had a soft rollout in February, and it was more or less on the job training, in the sense that the volunteer monitors would send in incident reports on what they thought was worthy of being cited or pinged or whatever, and what incidents should draw good operator reports. Because one thing the FCC emphasized was that they wanted the good operator reporting thing to continue, because they felt like that was a morale boost, and it boosted the enthusiasm of the amateur radio operators, gave them something to look forward to, and so forth. So we worked with the volunteer monitors. A lot of cases that they sent in, we said, no, we're not going to take that case, because we don't want to be perceived as the band police. So if somebody doesn't identify for 10 minutes and they identify after 15 minutes, we're not worried about that. That's not what we're out to correct. We're trying to correct and eliminate the debilitating problems in amateur radio, which you will hear on 75 meters sometimes in the evenings, the malicious interference, and sometimes 40 meters. I'm convinced that basically RF energy doesn't cause brain damage except on a couple of frequencies, one being 3860 and one around 7200. Used to be 14275, but that seems to have dissipated. That's what we want to focus on. So I think that the volunteer monitors have gotten the point now that we're not the band patrol or the band police, and we're only interested in problems that degrade the service. And the FCC also made it clear, and this did not go over too well with the volunteer monitors, that they would not pursue language cases because of bad experiences they had in the courts. And part of that reason was we had a chairman once who thought that anything that couldn't be said on the Hallmark channel was obscene and indecent. And the FCC lost a few cases in court over that. So they're staying away from that area. But generally where you have that problem, if you listen long enough, there are other rule violations involved, and you can focus on them and clear it up. As of let's see, looking at March and April, the volunteer monitors logged about 2,300 hours of monitoring time in the amateur service on the HF frequencies, and about 2,000 on the UHF, VHF, and other frequencies. So I'm really happy with the amount of hours that they've been monitoring. And this is sit at the desk, active monitoring. This is not having a scanner on in the background and so forth. This is active monitoring. And what they do is if they notice an egregious violation that would be debilitating to the amateur service or would spread if it wasn't stopped, they will file what they call an incident report. And we'll look at that. And then we make a decision whether to contact that licensee personally or formally, or send it to the FCC. We have 1 or 2 cases that have gone to the FCC, but in about 8 or 10 cases, contacting the licensee informally took care of the problem. And that's what we want to do if we can, because we want to conserve FCC resources for really big or bad situations that we have. Every quarter, we'll be issuing good operator reports. And for the last quarter ending in March, 17 operators in 15 states got these notices. And as it turns out, this was totally coincidental, but as it turns out, the first 2 or 3 operators to get them were teenagers. They were fairly new into the amateur radio service, but a good operator notice went to a 13-year-old in North Carolina for CW operation in the Youth on the Air special event, and a 14-year-old in Wyoming for outstanding single sideband operation. Now, the volunteer monitors who submitted them did not know the ages, so this turned out very well. A 2-meter repeater operator received a good operator citation in Pennsylvania for establishing and managing a COVID-19 net over here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which went over and was very successful. And other persons received notices for general sideband and CW operation on 10, 20, 40, and 75 meters. And so we've gotten about 10 nominations I've noticed for this quarter. I don't know that we'll have 17 going out the next quarter, but there will be quite a few going out. And I'm very happy with the response from some of the operators that we notified informally of certain rule violations, or certain things like maybe being out of band, FT8 and 40 meters when they were a technician, things like that. Things that we don't want to be issuing notices on and seem like we're patrolling the bands and we're the band cops. But in a cooperative effort, every one of those so far has responded with total cooperation from our email. We sent out a couple of letters, but if we can just do it informally by email, we'll try that first in the lesser cases, because we want to conserve our resources for the hard cases. Next year, we will be working with Flex Radio in developing some SDR systems so that we can do some of our own direction finding before it goes to the FCC with time difference of arrival systems. Now, Flex is engaged in a big government contract right now We've gotten a little bit of a glimpse of how they would help us, but as soon as that contract is over, we'll be working on that system, and that will allow us even more independence without having to go to the FCC for direction finding. We've sent a couple of cases over to the FCC now for direction finding, and we'll be hearing from those soon. And in the course of working on some of our cases, we've discovered a couple of violations for the FCC and other services. For example, a shortwave broadcast station that was supposed to be in around 3 megahertz was operating on 5, and the license had expired 10 years ago. And they were advertising on the internet and taking money for commercials and so forth. And we found an unauthorized ILS system at a small airport out in Tennessee. So this is a mutually beneficial agreement with the FCC so far. We've helped them, and they'll be helping us. And that's the story now. For general background on how we got here, I won't bore you with that, but if you go to the league website and up in the upper right-hand corner, just research or search volunteer monitor program, it'll tell you how it got started and why, but I don't want to go into all those details. Basically, it's the official observer program on speed, enhanced and revamped with a promise of greater and faster FCC action. And one thing we also wanted from the FCC was a better indication of what they were doing in those cases. So often the FCC model is like an IRS model. You don't really hear much about what's going on, but you know there's a lot going on. And with the Privacy Act being ratcheted down in recent years, a lot of times all you will hear from the FCC is what the final action in a case was. And some of these cases have taken entirely too long. FCC knows that, and they're aware of that too. And we just can't have cases taking that long, because 51% of enforcement is timeliness. And that's the whole point of this agreement, is that what happens will be significant. Otherwise, we won't bother people. And when we do have something significant, the action will be much timelier than in the past. And we called it the Volunteer Monitor Program to rebrand it. We had volunteer examiners, we have volunteer counsel, and so forth. So somebody suggested, why not just call it the Volunteer Monitors? And so the FCC liked that idea, and that's why they are not called official observers anymore. We just needed to rebrand it and give it a totally different look. I understand you have a lot of questions, so maybe we should get into those, but that's about it from my end.
Let's see, Riley, why don't I go ahead and start off the questions and ask what's a local repeater trustee to do? How do they find out how they're supposed to report a problem that they're having that they can't resolve on their own?
Okay. We depend on the repeater licensees and trustees to do the first instance review of what their problem is, for the simple reason that there's just so many repeaters across the country. We couldn't possibly get into solving all those cases, but generally they can do it. And generally there's somebody in the club or somebody in the group that has a suspicion as to who it is, or working together, they can narrow it down to a neighborhood, so forth. And the first thing we require is that once they find out who they think it is, to issue what's known as a stay-off letter. And that is a letter, as you know, a repeater is just an amateur radio station. And the licensee and trustee of the repeater has the right to require or to ban anyone they want to from operating on it for any reason or for no reason, just like you would in the station in your house. So when they find out that somebody is doing these things, they first have to order them to stay off. If they don't, then the FCC gets involved, because they will enforce stay off letters. But what's required in repeater situations is that the group itself do the basic legwork, just because there's so many repeaters, and there are so many linked repeaters. And to the extent that a repeater is wide area, to that extent it's more vulnerable. to malicious interference. And it would just be impossible for volunteer monitors to police all that from the get-go. We've had pretty good luck, though, so far in two repeater systems that were widely linked, one in California and one in the New York, New Jersey area, where they were able to, in California, they found the repeater that was where the interference was coming into the system from, and went from there and found out who it was. And basically similar situation in the New York, New Jersey area. But the trustee of the repeater, just like anybody making a complaint, would first go to the league and submit that problem for the volunteer monitor program. Now, the volunteer monitor will work with the licensee of the repeater or trustee and how to get its group to run it down and what the first steps are. But we can't take the initial investigative action. There are just too many of them.
Well, that makes sense. If I might follow up and just say, are the normal tools that were used in the OO program, field strength measurements, direction finding attempts, is all of that information still applicable? And would we pass that on?
Oh yes,
when we need it?
Whatever you have, and just do your documentation. Give us all the documentation you can, and we'll work with you on gathering that documentation, and we'll take it from there.
Is there a template for the documentation?
Not really, because every case is different. Every interference case is different, and every group has a different approach. And usually you folks can run these things down pretty good. We've had very good success with that. And I'm surprised that with the number of repeaters across the country and with the number that are linked up, I'm really surprised that there aren't more problems.
Well, thank you. Noji, Trevor, I could keep asking questions. Do you have others from those listening and watching today?
We keep monitoring the, no pun intended, the list of people asking questions. And Trevor just now put out a statement saying, please, if you have any questions, go ahead and post them here. And we aren't seeing any yet. So we're still waiting for the questions to come in. And like I said before, a lot of us really don't know, because this program is so new, exactly which questions to ask. So we're really relying on your knowledge and leadership there, Brett,
okay.
to know.
Well, I know that I know you're going to get two questions. One is, who do you complain to when you have a problem? If you don't know who a volunteer monitor is, and you complain to the league, and the league gets it to the volunteer monitoring program. Now, one thing that the FCC wanted was that the volunteer monitors have numbers rather than names, and that we not reveal all the names. And one reason for that is, in today's society, official observers were not happy about the abuse they were taking. You know how it is today. 25 years ago, somebody getting an official observer notice would be grateful because they'd rather hear from them than from the FCC. It's not that way today. Everybody's too thin-skinned and sensitive and anxious to take offense. So they promised to keep the names as anonymous insofar as possible. Now, if it goes to a deposition or a hearing or some formal administrative action, of course, the name would be revealed. And in some cases, volunteer monitors don't care if their names are revealed. So that's why we can't say, call Joe Dokes in such and such area if you're having a problem. Just go through the league and they'll get it to me and I'll get it to the right person. And maybe we may have 5 or 6 volunteer monitors working on it. And we especially will do that as we develop this time difference of arrival system with Flex and other companies that are going to be helping us with it. Another question that I think you'll get is, why are the section managers not more involved in it? And we stumbled in that regard, although I think it had a good outcome. The original intent was for all the applicants to have to apply through their section manager. And the section manager would vet out the applicant and then just give an opinion on the person. Fully half of the first 100 or so that came in had not gone through their section manager. So we were in a position of having to track down exactly who the section manager was for their area. And then it occurred to us that why bother the section managers with it? They work harder than anybody. The section managers are the ones that run the wheels off the cars, going to all these events. So why give them another layer of something to be bothered with And if they were involved in the volunteer monitor program, then they would get more complaints at all the amateur events that they went to. So it suddenly occurred to us that maybe that was a good thing. Let's leave them out of it so they can have deniability and just say, I don't work with the volunteer monitor program. If you got a notice or something and you turned in, I had nothing to do with it. You'll have to go through the league. So it probably is good that we didn't involve them, because I don't know how the section managers do what they do. Now, the ones I know literally are on the road all the time. Now, of course, that hasn't been true for the last 8 weeks or 9 weeks because of the COVID issue, but that'll pick up again in the fall. And they have so much work, and they run down a lot of local interference problems, a lot of TVI problems, RFI problems, problems from solar installations and so forth. They do so much work that we don't even know about to get them credit for. We just decided that probably they didn't need this extra burden. And we didn't do a good job of communicating that. That sort of just developed that way. But I think the result is good, because they don't have to be so involved in yet another activity that would run them all over the place.
Well, so Riley, is the volunteer monitoring program fully operational in Utah and fully staffed right now?
Yes, it's fully operational. I don't know. I know we don't have many in Utah. I'd have to look at to see what we have. I'm sure it's just 1 or 2, but then we don't need a lot in your state, because we don't get a lot of problems from there. But if you look at the population layout, the volunteer monitors are surprisingly evenly distributed around the country. And of course, if it's on HF and there's a problem, the volunteer monitor wouldn't have to be in Utah. Repeater situation, they would be. But Utah is included in there. All states are. There may be one exception. Montana may not have a volunteer monitor. I'm not sure about that. But basically, they're very evenly distributed. And one of the things that the FCC wanted was that in areas where they were particularly weak because of staff reductions and budget cuts, they wanted a little extra coverage in those areas. So we polled the regional directors, and I got a list of the areas where they wanted to make certain that we had coverage in, and our coverage matched up very well. So we do have those areas covered. So while it was very hard to set up, it's gotten off to a good start, and it's running full blown now. We've got about 50 or 60, I want to say, cases, but really maybe 10 are cases. The rest of them are situations that we'll work out informally, and we won't be going to the FCC with those. So right now, I'm very happy with the way things have worked out.
Oh, very good. So does the volunteer monitoring program deal with any issues regarding the commercialization of amateur radio, or is that outside the scope?
In what way? Commercialization in what way?
I'm not really sure. This is just a question that came in, and I don't have the liberty of expounding on it.
Okay, they may be talking about, well, I don't know what they'd be talking about. One possible angle of that would be we're going to have some nibbling of our frequencies on the higher edges, with 5G and things like that, and that's inevitable. And we're just going to have to defend that as best we can. I'm not sure what they mean otherwise about commercialization.
Okay, sorry. That's all I have about that one.
Okay. Now, let me say this. You have my call sign there. I'll answer all of these questions on email if they don't get a chance to ask them tonight. It's my call sign at awrl.net. So I'll take any questions, and give me a couple of days to answer. But you will get an answer, and if it's a detailed thing, we'll just talk on the telephone about it.
All right, very good.
So Riley, if I might ask, as a repeater trustee myself, if I were to have an issue that I just really couldn't resolve, I knew who the offender was, they just wouldn't comply and stay off the repeater, and I were to report that to the league, is there a way for me to confidentially monitor that or know what's going on, or is it completely hands off once it's reported?
No, we would keep you apprised if you had to go that route. It hasn't happened so far, but we would keep you apprised. There also are other remedies. Most states have statute now related to harassment by communication. So one simple thing, one easy thing that a number of repeater groups have done is if they can't keep somebody off the repeater, they go to the local courts and get an injunction. And that's happened a couple of times, and that has a good bit of success. Well, I would say total success in the cases where it's happened, because the judges don't like to see their orders violated, and it can be harassment by communications, whether it's telephone or a repeater or whatever. But basically, if you issue the stay off letter and you don't have that remedy, if the person doesn't stay off, then the FCC follows up with that pretty quickly.
I just received a text, Riley, regarding the commercialization, and it had to do more with commercial enterprises using ham volunteers to provide free services or pecuniary interest.
That's always floated around as an issue, and the league gives advice on that if there's any doubt about that. There are some pretty close lines in that area, but if there's any doubt about it, the league has guidance on that. I don't have any cases involving violations in that regard, but lots of questions are asked about it, whether it has to do with some civic event or whatever, but the league will give you guidance on that.
Thank you very much. Let's see, I do, while we're waiting for another one to come in, I had another question. Are we closer to the reserve pool opening up again so that those of us who want to participate will have an opportunity to do so?
I would think it's going to be at least a year before it does. I would say about a year we'll be moving some more into it. Now, here's the thing. If we have very thin coverage in a certain area and all of a sudden we're having some serious problems in that area, we will contact the reserve pool people who are closest to that area and bring them in, and they will help out with that case. So they'll be coming in and out of the program on an as needed basis. But as far as opening up for applications and moving them over into the volunteer monitor program in mass, that's going to be at least a year. But some of the members of the reserve pool can expect to get a call from time to time to help out with a certain case or to replace somebody in their area who is no longer able to do it.
Thank you.
Hey, Riley, I just got a question about the cheaper radios that are able to be obtained by some of the preppers. Oh, it's like I'm not muted. Okay. So some of the prepper people are getting hold of these cheaper radios. Is there anything that can be done or we should do about helping to, crack down on them? What's the best way to handle that kind of situation?
Well, the commission doesn't take the individual approach to that. They take a corporate approach. And where this is happening, we'd like to know about it, but the commission will approach that from a marketing standpoint, and they will find out where they're getting them and what the source is. I guess you're referring to Bofang radios, which the commission has had that issue now for quite a while. And I don't know if they're up to speed with that or not, but the commission is very serious about the marketing of these things, but they don't take an individual approach. In other words, they won't, they will work with or cite a truck stop chain rather than a truck stop individually. And so they will get to the importer and the advertiser and so forth, but we do want to know about that so the commission can measure the problem across the country. And it's sprinkled across the country. It's nothing major, but it's out there. And we know that Bofang was issued an order, I guess about 6 months ago, to stop marketing some of these units or face a fine of, I think, $9,000 or $10,000 a day. So they had to make some changes in that. But of course, with these cheap units, you get thousands of them out there before it gets the FCC's attention. So they're always playing catch up with it. But with radios being so cheap these days, that'll be a continuing annoyance, but I don't know how much of a problem it'll be.
Okay, what's your call sign one more time, Riley?
It's a Kilo 4 Zulu Delta Hotel. And just send me an email. It's at awrl.net. And I will answer your question or send you whatever you need or find somebody who knows the answer.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much.
Riley, I had a last question, if you've got just another minute. You'd mentioned the issues on 80 and to some extent on 40. Without going into any details, can you let the hams know what in general can be done about that?
Well, it usually relates to a long-standing net, and somebody's on that frequency for a while, and the net is about to start. And the net comes in there and says, you got to get off. We've had this net for 30 years on this frequency. And of course, you know how that net goes. Automatically, you got some anger in there, and the person refuses to move. And it goes downhill from there. So if people would just realize that there's plenty of room for everybody, and that's why every radio that's ever been made and is made today has one knob on it that's bigger than all the other knobs. That's to change frequencies. And we have thousands of frequencies, thousands of discrete frequencies, and we're not really even channelized except on 60 meters. Another thing that happens is you have the people that enjoy AM radio communications, and they have the wide signals, the very wide signals. That angers some people because while there is no bandwidth limit, the rules do say that you don't use any more than is necessary. Now, on a crowded band, a very wide signal, whether it's for AM aficionados or not, is just rude. On other bands, it's not the best idea, but if they're not too occupied, I guess it's okay. And propagation changes on certain bands. As you know, on 40 meters, the propagation on 40 meters can change just in 15 or 20 minutes. And you'll be hearing somebody that you didn't even know was on there. And then they come on top of somebody else. And it's just a lack of, it's rudeness and a lack of manners. And a lot of it is juvenile reactions to problems that could easily be solved by turning the dial a few kilohertz. And we try to work with the parties on those because we don't want to embarrass the amateur radio service over things like that. Because after all, everybody took a test for this stuff. They're supposed to know how it works, and they're supposed to know how to use it.
Thank you very much, Riley. Noji, are there any other questions for Mr. Hollingsworth?
Well, there's one that came up a couple of times. I'll just reiterate it. And it was, I'm not sure if this falls under Riley's concerns, but it's any word on encrypted communication, such as for mesh network. I don't know what the context.
No, I don't know what that context would be. Would be, and unless they're referring to the bandwidth proceedings that the league is considering. I don't know if there's a bandwidth proceeding before the FCC now or not, but there's some digital proceedings. There's they're planning to, or they would like to expand technician privileges because the technician license was never intended as an entry-level license like the novice license was. And the technicians really don't have much to work with, and we're losing a lot of technicians because they just lose interest in radio and don't pursue higher license classes. But beyond that, I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but if they will refine the question, send it to me, I'll get an answer.
Yeah, I think we'll just have him email it to you. That sounds like the best.
Okay.
So thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Brett.
I'm good, Nochi. I have no further questions, but other than to just say thank you to Riley, and we appreciate your generous time.
Oh, thank you so much, Riley and Brett, both of you guys, for taking this time. Very, very kind of both of you to do this. And on behalf of Utah Valley Amateur Radio Club and all of Utah, thank you very much for spending this time with us. So appreciate you guys being there.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And maybe we should do this periodically, and have periodic updates, because this program developed so fast, we didn't get word out quite as fast as we wanted to. I expected it to take about a year longer than it has, but looking at it in the beginning of 2018, I think we're about a year ahead of where we thought we'd be. And so because of that, we don't quite get the word out on everything. And it's a little harder now with no Hamfest around, no big events, but we'll make up for that in the fall, I hope.
Oh, I'm sure you will. Yeah, and you know, it looks like this is a good place to cut it short too, because my wife just texted me and said that I'm starting to pick up on your accent there, Riley, and so it's probably a good place. Thank you very much.
You're the one with an accent. I don't have one.
Okay,
All right,
7:37.
guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you, Brett, so much for setting this up. You've been more than generous, and all your time. Thank you for everything you've done for this.
Happy to do it. Thank you so much, Noji and Trevor.
All right, and it's been recorded, so we'll get this in digital, and we'll be able to send it out from there to those who might have missed our meeting tonight.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.